The sound came first, sharp, clean, like a gunshot echoing across the frozen earth of the Southern Ute Reservation. Ayanna White Eagle's head snapped to the side, blood already pooling at the corner of her mouth. She didn't cry out. 8 years of marriage to Thomas White Eagle had taught her that silence was its own kind of strength. Behind her, pressed against her legs like frightened rabbits, 4 small bodies trembled in the December cold. Victor White Eagle lowered his hand slowly, deliberately. He wanted her to see the threat in every movement, to understand that this was just the beginning. His shadow fell across her kneeling form, and somewhere in the distance a crow called out, as if bearing witness to what was happening here. "Last time, sister." His Apache came out rough, thick, with anger barely contained. "You marry me, or you get out." Ayanna looked up at him, her brother-in-law, the man who had stood beside Thomas at their wedding 9 years ago, the man who had smiled when she gave birth to Casa, who had held baby Mika at her baptism, who had brought soup when Tala was sick. That man was gone now, if he had ever truly existed at all. 3 tribal council members stood behind Victor, their faces carved from stone, their eyes looking anywhere but at her. Frank Jessup, the Bureau of Indian Affairs agent, leaned against his government truck 30 feet away, smoking a cigarette like he was watching a mildly interesting theater performance rather than a woman's life being destroyed. "The man who killed my husband," Ayanna said quietly, "will never raise my children." The second slap came faster, harder. This time she fell. The frozen ground bit into her palms, and she tasted copper on her tongue. 8-year-old Casa lunged forward with a cry that was half rage, half terror. His small fists connected with Victor's thigh. The boy might as well have been punching a tree. Victor shoved him away with one hand. Casa hit the dirt hard enough to knock the wind from his lungs. "Papa!" 6-year-old Mika screamed, confused, calling for a father 8 months dead. 4-year-old Tala went silent, her mouth open in a scream that wouldn't come. She had stopped talking 6 weeks ago. The medicine woman said shock. Ayanna knew it was grief. Baby Nako, strapped to Ayanna's back in his cradleboard, began to wail. The sound cut through everything else, a thin thread of humanity in a moment that had none. Victor threw a canvas bag at Ayanna's feet. It landed with a soft thud, spilling a few meager possessions across the frozen earth. A blanket, a small pot, a leather pouch containing the last physical remnants of Thomas, a lock of his hair, a turquoise stone he'd given her on their wedding day, a photograph so worn the faces were barely visible. "Be off the reservation before sunset." Victor's voice was calm now, satisfied. "If you come back and you're not my wife, I'll make sure BIA puts those kids in boarding school. You know what happens there. They'll forget their language, forget their people, forget you ever existed." Ayanna gathered her children. Casa came to her side, his small chest heaving, his eyes bright with unshed tears. Mika clutched her skirt. Tala attached herself to Ayanna's leg like a barnacle. Nako continued to cry against her back. "You have until sunset," Victor repeated. Ayanna lifted the bag with one hand, pulled Casa close with the other, and began walking. She didn't look back. Looking back was for people who had somewhere to return to. Behind her, one of the council members spoke in rapid Apache, too quiet for her to hear. Victor's laugh carried clearly across the winter air. The sun hung low in the December sky, pale and offering no warmth. They walked. The first day passed in a blur of motion and cold. Ayanna kept them moving one foot in front of the other because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant breaking. The dirt road stretched ahead, leading away from everything she had known for 28 years. Behind them, the San Juan Mountains rose like ancient guardians, indifferent to human suffering. Casa carried a bundle that was too heavy for an 8-year-old. His thin shoulders bent under the weight, but he didn't complain. Every few steps he would glance at his mother, checking to see if she was still upright, still moving, still somehow holding them all together. Mika and Tala held hands, stumbling over rocks their moccasins never meant for this kind of journey. Mika hummed under her breath some fragment of a lullaby Ayanna had sung when the world still made sense. Tala said nothing, but her eyes tracked every movement, every shadow like a rabbit watching for hawks. Nako had stopped crying. The silence was worse. By midday, Ayanna's feet were bleeding. She could feel the wetness inside her moccasins, warm at first, then sticky, then cold. She didn't stop walking. "Mama," Kasa's voice cracked on the word. "Can we rest?" The sun said no. Sunset was coming. Victor's threat hung in the air like smoke. Soon, little eagle. Soon. They stopped by a stream bed, mostly frozen. Ayanna knelt, broke through the thin ice, filled her hands with water, so cold it burned. She gave the children what she could, watching their small throats work as they swallowed. From the canvas bag she pulled out the last piece of fry bread, divided it into 4 careful portions. The children ate. She pretended she wasn't hungry. "Is there more?" Tala's voice was so quiet, Ayanna almost missed it. The first words in 6 weeks, and they were about hunger. "In Durango, little bird. We'll find food in Durango." "How far?" Kasa asked. "1 more day." The boy nodded, adult seriousness settling over his 8-year-old features. He had been forced to grow up the day his father died. Now with every mile childhood slipped further from his grasp. As the sun began its descent, they found shelter under a massive cottonwood tree, its bare branches offering no warmth, but at least breaking the wind. Ayanna built a small fire with practiced hands, the movement so familiar she didn't need to think. Gather tinder, arrange kindling, strike spark, coax flame, feed slowly. These were the first things an Apache girl learned. These skills had kept her people alive for centuries. The fire wouldn't keep Victor's threats away, but it would keep them alive through the night. She arranged what blankets they had, creating a nest for the children. They huddled together, body heat their best defense against the December cold. Ayanna sat with her back against the cottonwood Nako in her arms, watching the fire, watching the darkness beyond. She didn't sleep. Mothers of 4 in hostile territory didn't have that luxury. As dawn broke thin and gray, they walked again. Durango appeared on the horizon like a promise that might be a lie. Population 3,574, according to the painted sign at the town limits. Ayanna read it carefully, grateful that Thomas had taught her English in the quiet evenings of their marriage. He'd insisted. "The world speaks English now," he'd said. "Our children need to move in both worlds." Their children, no longer his, only hers now. Main Street bustled with Saturday commerce, cowboys and ranchers, housewives with shopping baskets, automobiles and horse-drawn wagons sharing the road. Children ran between storefronts, their laughter bright in the cold air. Normal life. The kind of life Ayanna hadn't lived in 8 months since the day Frank Jessup knocked on her door and told her Thomas had been killed in a logging accident. Accident. The word tasted like ash. She straightened her shoulders, adjusted Nako's cradleboard, took Mika and Tala by the hands. Kasa walked beside her small guardian, small soldier. "We stay together," she told them in Apache. "We are strong. We are White Eagle. We do not break." Kasa repeated it back to her, a prayer, a promise. The first door closed before she could even state her business. Durango Mercantile. The shopkeeper took one look at her children, at the bronze of their skin and the cut of their clothing, and his face shuddered. "We don't serve Indians." The second door, Silver Ridge Hotel. "We're full up. Try somewhere else." The third door, Dixon's Diner. "Can't hire someone with 4 kids, sorry." She wasn't asking for charity. She had skills. She could sew, could mend, could work leather until it was soft as butter. She knew herbs, the healing kind, and the kind that could kill. She could birth calves and babies with equal competence. She could track a deer across hard rock and bring it down with 1 arrow. None of it mattered. Not to the people of Durango, Colorado in December of 1942. By the 10th door, Mika had started crying. By the 12th, Casa's jaw was set so tight, Ayana worried about his teeth. By the 14th, even, she was ready to give up. St. Columba Church was the last stop. Father Murphy met her at the door, and at least his face showed sympathy. He gave her half a loaf of bread and a jar of preserves, pressing them into her hands with an apology in his eyes. "Times are hard," he said. "People are afraid. It's not right, but it's true. I wish I could do more. You did more than most, Father." She left before he could see her cry. The railroad tracks marked the eastern edge of town, separating Durango proper from the scattered homes and businesses that clung to respectability's outskirts. Ayana found herself there as the afternoon sun began its slow descent, sitting on her canvas bag, her children gathered around her like the last leaves on an autumn tree. Casa stood closest, his hand on her shoulder, protective. Too young to protect anyone, but trying anyway. "Mama, what do we do now?" She didn't answer, couldn't answer. 32 miles from the reservation, 14 doors, no said in 3 languages. Her feet were bleeding through her moccasins. Her children were hungry. Thomas was dead. Victor was waiting. And she had absolutely nowhere to go. The thought came unbidden, unwelcome. Maybe Victor was right. Maybe the children would be better off with him. At least they'd have food, shelter, a home. No. She pushed the thought away violently. Better dead than in Victor's care. Better anything than that. But what was the alternative? Keep walking until her feet gave out. Watch her children starve because their mother's pride was bigger than their hunger. "Thomas," she whispered in Apache, speaking to ghosts, to memory, to the space where her husband should have been. "What do I do? How do I save them?" Nako began to cry. That thin wail that meant he was hungry had been hungry for too long. Ayana reached back, touched his small head, felt her hands shake. She was breaking. Finally, after everything, she was breaking. "Mama," Casa's voice cut through the spiral of despair. She looked up. Her son stood straighter than any 8-year-old should have to stand, his small face fierce with determination. Papa said, "The White Eagle never surrenders. We keep going." Tears tracked down her cheeks. She couldn't stop them. "Casa, I don't know where to go." "You taught me fall 7 times, stand 8 times. We only fell." He counted on his small fingers, serious, deliberate. 6 times. We try one more place. Something in her chest. Something that had been cracking for months, for years, maybe found a way to hold together for one more hour, for one more try. She pulled him close, kissed the top of his head, breathed in the smell of him. Child, hope, reason to keep fighting. "You're right, little eagle. One more place." She stood, gathered her children, turned to look down the road one more time. That's when she saw the truck. Ford 1938 model, dusty green, with words painted on the side panel, "Morrison Ranch Cattle and Horses." The truck slowed, then stopped. The driver's door opened and a man stepped out. Tall, maybe 6 feet, mid-30s, brown hair under a worn Stetson. Work clothes that had seen real work. He moved like someone who spent his life on horseback, that particular economy of motion that came from understanding how to work with animals. He looked at them, really looked. Not the quick glance of assessment and dismissal that Ayana had received all day. This was different. This was someone seeing human beings in distress and actually caring about it. "You folks all right?" His voice was rough, like he didn't use it much. Western accent, but not harsh, just weathered. Ayana stood instinctively, moving between the stranger and her children. Trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. "We're fine." "Ma'am, with respect, you don't look fine. It's near freezing. Sun's going down. Those kids won't make it through the night out here. We've survived worse." "Maybe so, but tonight you don't have to." He stood by his truck, making no move to come closer, hands visible, non-threatening, waiting. Casa tugged at her sleeve. "Mama!" The man's eyes went to Casa. Something flickered across his face. Memory, pain, then decision. I've got a bunkhouse on my ranch. It's empty, warm, dry. You can stay the night at least. No strings. Morning comes, you want to leave, I'll drive you wherever you want to go. Why? The word came out sharper than Ayanna intended. Why would you help us? Your boy waved at me. She blinked, confused. What? Back there half a mile ago. He waved, like he was just saying hello to another person on the road. It's been a long time since anyone did that. Ayanna looked at Casa, who nodded small and uncertain. The stranger walked to the passenger side of his truck, opened the door, stepped back. An invitation, a choice. Where would you take us? Morrison Ranch, my place, about 8 miles northwest. The bunkhouse has a stove, beds, a door that locks. You'll be safe. White men always have conditions. He nodded slowly. Fair point. But my condition is simple. Trust me for 12 hours. Come morning you want to leave, I'll take you anywhere in the county. No questions asked. Ayanna studied him, his stance, his eyes, the way he kept his distance, giving her space to decide. The truck behind him was real solid. The promise of warmth was real. And her children were so cold. But it was his next question that changed everything. He didn't ask, what happened to you? He didn't ask, why are you here? He didn't ask any of the questions that required her to relive her trauma for a stranger's curiosity. Instead, he asked, what can you do? Ayanna stared at him, genuinely surprised. What can you do? Skills. Work. I've got a ranch that needs running, and I'm short-handed. If you want to stay longer than one night, I need help. So what can you do? For the first time in 2 days, Ayanna felt something besides despair. Someone was asking about her capabilities, not her tragedy. Someone wanted to know what she could contribute, not what had been taken from her. She stood straighter, dignity returning to her spine. I can sew and mend. I know herbs, the ones that heal and the ones that don't. I can work leather, make it soft. I can track game. I can cook not white man food, but I can learn. I can birth animals. She paused, met his eyes directly. I don't complain. I don't steal. I work until the job is done. You know horses? Apache are born on horseback. The smallest smile touched his face. That'll do. He gestured toward the truck. Ayanna looked at her children. 4 pairs of eyes looked back at her, waiting for their mother to decide if this stranger was salvation or just another kind of danger. She thought about Victor, about boarding schools, about her children's faces when she had nothing left to give them. She nodded to Casa. Her son helped his sisters into the truck bed, then climbed in himself. Ayanna settled into the passenger seat with Nako, her hand never far from the door handle, ready to fight or flee if this man proved to be a liar. The stranger closed her door, gently, walked around to the driver's side, started the engine. I'm Caleb Morrison, he said as they pulled onto the road. That ranch is mine, has been for 15 years. Ayanna White Eagle. These are my children. Casa Mika Talanako. Apache, yes. You're a long way from the reservation, yes. He didn't push, just drove the truck rumbling over the dirt road heading northwest toward mountains that glowed purple in the dying light. After a mile, Caleb spoke again. The bunkhouse hasn't been used in 6 months. It'll need cleaning, but it's sound. Good roof, stove works. There's firewood stacked outside. We can clean. I'll bring food in about an hour. My foreman Pete, he always cooks too much. Figured you might be hungry. Ayanna said nothing. Accepting food felt like accepting charity, and charity meant debt, and debt meant obligation. But her children were hungry, and pride was a poor substitute for sustenance. Tomorrow, Caleb continued, eyes on the road, if you're willing, I'll show you around. See if this arrangement might work for more than one night. I meant what I said. I need help. Ranch work never ends, and Pete's getting older. If you want a job, I've got one. Fair trade. How much? Room and board for all 5 of you. $15 a month cash. It was half what a white worker would earn. They both knew it. But it was also more than Ayanna had, which was nothing. How long? As long as it works for both of us. The ranch appeared as the sun touched the horizon. 640 acres of Animas River Valley with a 2-story house built from timber and stone. Red barn. Bunkhouse. Horse corral with 6 animals. Chicken coop, a well, mountains behind. River in the distance. It looked like the kind of place where a person could build a life, or at least survive the winter. As Caleb's truck pulled into the yard, an older man emerged from the barn, rifle in hand, suspicion clear on his weathered face. He was maybe 60, Mexican-American, built like someone who'd spent his life working with his hands. The men spoke rapid Spanish. Ayanna caught some of it. The older man, Pete, was asking why Caleb had brought Indians to the ranch. Caleb's response was short, firm. They need a place. The bunkhouse is empty, and I don't care what people in town will say. Pete's expression softened as he looked at the children. Whatever his reservations about Ayanna, the sight of 4 hungry kids apparently settled the matter. The bunkhouse hasn't been cleaned in half a year, Jefe. Then it's good we've got someone who knows how to clean. Pete approached carefully, removing his hat. Señora, niños, welcome to Morrison Ranch. Casa stepped forward, small and fierce. We work. We don't take charity. Pete's eyebrows rose, then he smiled, genuine and warm. Good. We need workers. The bunkhouse was exactly as advertised. 2 rooms, dusty cobwebs in the corners, a small kitchen area with an old stove. But the roof was sound. The windows had shutters that actually closed. The floor was solid wood, not dirt. Ayanna inspected every corner while her children watched. She checked the stove, tested the door locks, examined the ceiling for leaks. Years of living on the reservation had taught her to assess shelter quickly and thoroughly. Caleb watched from the doorway. I know it's not much. It's good. She meant it. He returned 20 minutes later with firewood, 4 blankets, a kerosene lamp, matches, and a bar of soap. Real soap, not the harsh lye kind. Get settled. I'll bring food in an hour. True to his word, he returned with a pot of stew bread and milk. Real cow's milk, rich and white. Pete made extra. Thought you might be hungry. It's too much. There's plenty more. Eat. After he left, the children fell on the food like wolves. Ayanna portioned it carefully, making sure they ate more than she did. The stew was thick with meat and vegetables, the bread was fresh, and the milk was so rich Mika's eyes went wide. Mama, it's so good, she whispered, almost reverently. Tala spoke for the 2nd time that day. Is the man nice? Ayanna looked at the door where Caleb Morrison had stood offering food and shelter with no demands attached. At least, no demands yet. I don't know, little bird. We'll see. That night, after the children were asleep in a nest of blankets by the stove, Ayanna sat alone in the darkness. From her leather pouch, she pulled out Thomas's turquoise stone, held it in her palm until it warmed from her skin. Thomas, she whispered in Apache, speaking to the dead because the living had offered no answers. I don't know if this is the right path, but I'm walking it anyway. Watch over us from the spirit world. If this man can be trusted, send me a sign. Tell me if I'm making a terrible mistake. Outside in the main ranch house, Caleb Morrison stood at his kitchen window looking across the yard at the bunkhouse. Light glowed from its windows for the first time in 6 months. Smoke rose from its chimney. Life had returned to a building that had been empty since Sarah died. For the first time in 5 years, the ranch felt less like a tomb and more like a home. He didn't know Ayanna White Eagle's full story, didn't know what had driven an Apache woman and her 4 children to walk 32 miles in December cold, didn't know what desperation looked like until he'd seen it in her eyes by those railroad tracks. But he knew loneliness, knew loss, knew what it felt like to wake up every morning with no purpose except to keep breathing. Maybe helping her was selfish. Maybe he needed them as much as they needed him. The lights in the bunkhouse finally went dark. Caleb turned away from the window, headed to bed, and slept better than he had in months. Outside, the December stars turned overhead, indifferent and eternal, as a woman and 4 children spent their first night in something that almost felt like safety. Tomorrow would bring questions. Tomorrow would bring decisions. Tomorrow would determine if this fragile arrangement could survive contact with reality. But tonight, they were warm. They were fed. They were safe. For now, that was enough. Dawn came to Morrison Ranch the way it had come for 1,000 years before white men built fences and called the land theirs, quietly, with colors that had no names in English. Purple bleeding into gold, softening to pink, surrendering to the pale blue of a winter morning. Ayanna White Eagle woke before the sun touched the horizon. This was Apache time, the hour when the world held its breath between darkness and light. She had been waking at this hour since she was 6 years old, when her grandmother would shake her awake and say, "The birds are singing. Why are you still asleep?" Her children lay in a tangle of blankets near the stove, breath rising in small clouds despite the dying embers. Casa had one arm thrown over Mika, protective, even in sleep. Tala was curled into the smallest possible ball as if making herself invisible. Nako slept in the drawer they'd turned into a makeshift cradle, his tiny fist pressed against his mouth. They were safe. For now, they were safe. Ayanna rose carefully, wrapped herself in the thinnest blanket so her children could keep the warmer ones, and stepped outside into the frozen morning. The ranch was already awake. Smoke rose from the main house chimney, meaning someone was making coffee. Light glowed from the barn, meaning someone was tending the animals. In the east, the sun was just beginning to think about rising, painting the San Juan Mountains in shades of fire. Morrison Ranch spread before her like a promise she didn't dare believe in yet. 640 acres of valley land bordered by the Animas River on one side and rising foothills on the other. The kind of land her people had once moved through, freely following game, and seasons before the reservations, before the boundaries, before everything changed. She saw Caleb Morrison emerge from the barn carrying a bucket in each hand. He moved with the economy of someone who had been doing this work since before he could remember. No wasted motion, no hesitation. When he saw her standing in the bunkhouse doorway, he paused clearly, surprised. Ayanna made a decision. She walked toward him, chin up, shoulders back, every inch of her body language saying she was ready to work, not ready to be pitied. "You said you'd show me the work," she called out when she was close enough. Caleb set down the buckets. "Sun's not even up yet." "Apache wake with the birds, we're ready." She saw him process this, saw him recalculate whatever assumptions he'd made about her. Good. Let him understand she wasn't here for charity. Let him understand she earned what she received. "You know how to handle a pitchfork." Instead of answering, she walked into the barn, selected a 3-pronged fork from the wall, and demonstrated the proper technique her husband had taught her years ago. Efficient, clean, the movements of someone who had mucked stalls and spread hay and done all the unglamorous work that kept a ranch running. Caleb watched, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Then he nodded once, sharp and decisive. "You learned that from your husband. Thomas had a small ranch on the reservation before he worked the lumber mill. I did everything when he was gone." It was the most personal information she'd volunteered. The past tense hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Caleb didn't press. Instead, he showed her the routine. Which horses needed grain, which needed hay, where the water troughs were, how to check hooves, how to watch for signs of illness or injury. He talked like a teacher, clear and patient, assuming competence rather than ignorance. Halfway through the lesson, Ayanna stopped him. "That one, the bay mare, she's favoring her left front." Caleb turned to look at the horse in question. "What makes you say that? Watch how she shifts her weight. See? She's putting pressure on the right side." He approached the mare, slowly ran his hand down her leg, lifted the hoof. After a moment of careful examination, he pulled out a small stone wedged against the frog of the hoof. The horse immediately stood more evenly. "Damn! Good eye." Ayana allowed herself the smallest smile. "My people have known horses for 200 years. Your people may be 50. For the first time since they'd met Caleb Morrison, laughed. Not much, just a quick huff of genuine amusement, but it transformed his face. For a moment he looked younger, less burdened, almost happy. 50 might be generous in my family's case. My grandfather thought horses were the devil's creation, preferred mules. Mules are stubborn. So was my grandfather. They worked in companionable silence after that, and Ayana felt something she hadn't felt in 8 months. Respect. Not pity, not judgment, not the careful distance people maintained around tragedy. Just respect, one competent person acknowledging another. The sun had fully risen by the time Pete Garcia appeared at the barn door, wiping his hands on a kitchen towel. "Breakfast is ready," he called out in English, then switched to Spanish directed at Caleb. "I made enough for an army. You bringing them to the house?" Ayana stiffened. The main house. The white man's house. She'd cleaned houses like that, served in houses like that, but she'd never been invited to eat in one as an equal. Caleb must have seen her hesitation. "It's just breakfast, not a presidential dinner. Pete always cooks too much. Might as well help us eat it." Pete added, "I made eggs, bacon, biscuits, fresh coffee. The children should eat while it's hot." The mention of her children decided it. Ayana went to the bunkhouse, woke them gently, made sure their faces were clean and their hair was neat. She told Casa in Apache to make sure his siblings behaved perfectly, to eat slowly, to show these men that White Eagle children knew how to conduct themselves. The kitchen in the main house was larger than the entire bunkhouse. A massive table dominated the center, scarred from decades of use, but solid as bedrock. The stove was a beautiful cast-iron beast that radiated heat, and the windows faced east, flooding the room with morning light. Pete had set places for 7. 7. Like they belonged there. The children hung back uncertain until Ayana nodded permission. They sat quietly, hands folded, waiting. Casa kept his eyes on his mother, ready to follow her lead. Mika stared at the mountains of food with wonder. Tala was silent as always. Nako babbled happily from Ayana's arms, the only one too young to understand the significance of this moment. Pete served plates heaped with scrambled eggs, thick-cut bacon and biscuits the size of Ayana's fist. When he poured milk for the children, real cow's milk, rich and white. Mika's eyes went so wide Pete laughed. "Drink up, Nina. We have 3 cows. More milk than we know what to do with." Caleb sat at the head of the table, but not in a way that demanded deference. He ate like a working man, efficiently and without fuss. Between bites he looked at Casa. "You're the oldest." "Yes, sir." Casa's English was careful, precise. Thomas had taught him well. "How old?" 8. "Almost 9. That's about when I started working this ranch. My father put me on a horse, said, 'Don't fall off.' And that was the extent of the lesson." "Did you fall off?" Casa asked, forgetting his shyness for a moment. 3 times the first day. "But I got back on every time." Caleb took a sip of coffee. "After breakfast, if you want, there's a gentle mare that needs exercise. You could ride her around the corral. Prove you can stay on better than I did." Casa's face lit up with the first genuine smile Ayana had seen in weeks. Not a big smile, not yet, but real. A glimpse of the boy he'd been before everything fell apart. "I can stay on, sir. I promise." "We'll see." After the meal, after the children had eaten, until they couldn't possibly eat more, Caleb walked with Ayana back outside. The day had warmed slightly enough that the frost was beginning to melt from the grass. "I've been thinking about your situation," he said without preamble. "Here's what I'm proposing. You and the kids stay in the bunkhouse. You work the ranch help with cooking, mending, animal care, general upkeep. Pete and I handle the heavy labor, but we need someone to keep things organized, someone to make sure this place runs smoothly." Ayanna waited. There was always a catch. I'll pay $15 a month plus room and board for all 5 of you. That means meals, heat, a roof, safety, and respect. I don't care that you're Apache, I care that you work hard. $15 is not much. She said it flatly without accusation. Just truth. I can afford it, and with food for 5 people, heat, shelter, it adds up to more than 15. Plus, I'm offering something money can't buy, a place where people won't spit at your feet for being Indian. How long? As long as you want to stay and the work gets done. Ayanna studied him for a long moment, looking for the lie, the hidden agenda, the thing that would make this too good to be true. But Caleb Morrison met her eyes steadily, and in his face she saw something she recognized. Loneliness, the kind that came from loss, not from choice. She extended her hand, Apache-style forearm to forearm rather than palm to palm. 1 month. We try 1 month. See if it works. His hand was calloused, warm, firm, without being crushing. Deal. As she turned to go back to the bunkhouse, he called after her. One more thing. When people in town ask, I'll tell them you're hired help, nothing more. What you've been through, where you came from, that's your business, not theirs. Ayanna stopped, looked back. Why are you doing this, really? Caleb was quiet for a moment, his eyes distant. 5 years ago, when my wife died, someone should have helped me. No one did. I figured maybe I could be that someone for somebody else. It was the most vulnerable thing he'd said to her. The admission cost him something. She could see it in the way he wouldn't quite meet her eyes, in the tension in his shoulders. I understand loss, she said softly. Then she walked away before either of them could say more. The next 2 weeks unfolded like a flower opening to sunlight, slowly and with caution, but undeniably. Ayanna worked from dawn until well after dark, and she worked with a fierce competence that impressed even Pete, who had been ranching since before she was born. She mended torn shirts with stitches so small they were nearly invisible. She made jerky using Apache methods, hanging strips of venison with herbs Pete had never heard of. Creating something so flavorful, he demanded the recipe. She helped birth a calf, at 2 a.m, standing hip-deep in blood and birth fluids, without flinching, her hands sure and gentle as she guided the new life into the world. When Pete's favorite work gloves finally gave up their ghost-torn beyond simple patching, she took scraps of leather and braided them into reins so beautifully crafted, Caleb asked if she could make more to sell in town. The children adapted as children do, with resilience that looked like magic but was really just survival instinct, honed sharp. Casa learned to ride. He fell twice, got back on both times, and by the end of the first week was cantering around the corral with a grin that transformed his serious little face. Caleb watched from the fence rail, offering occasional guidance, but mostly just letting the boy find his balance. Mika appointed herself in charge of the chickens, collecting eggs every morning while singing Apache lullabies in a voice like silver bells. The chickens improbably seemed to respond to her, laying more eggs than they had in months. Tala followed Pete everywhere, a silent shadow who watched everything and said nothing. The old man took to calling her mi sombrita, my little shadow, and didn't seem bothered by her silence. He talked to her constantly in Spanish and English, and occasional Apache words. Ayanna taught him, keeping up a running commentary about ranch work and life and whatever came into his head. Tala never answered, but she listened. Ayanna could see her daughter absorbing it all, storing it away. Nako learned to pull himself up using the corral fence, standing on wobbling legs and laughing at absolutely everything. His first independent steps happened on a Tuesday afternoon, lurching toward Caleb, who was fixing a gate. The big man caught the baby without thinking, lifted him high, and was rewarded with delighted shrieks. Slowly, carefully, something was building between them all. Not quite family yet, but not strangers anymore either. The first real laughter came on a Saturday morning. Tala, emboldened by 2 weeks of safety, had been watching the chickens with unusual intensity. While Pete was distracted, showing Casa how to oil a saddle, The little girl caught the friendliest hen, carried her across the yard, and somehow managed to place the bird on top of Caleb's hat while he was bent over examining a loose board. The hen settled there like she'd been planning it all along. When Caleb straightened up, the chicken rode his head like a feathered crown, clucking indignantly at the altitude change. Pete saw it first. His laughter started as a cough, then exploded into full belly laughs. Casa joined in, then Mika, then Ayanna couldn't help herself. Even Caleb, after a moment of pure confusion, started laughing as he carefully removed the affronted chicken from his head. Tala didn't laugh, but she smiled. A real smile, small and precious as spring's first flower. That evening, after the work was done and the children were fed and drowsy, Caleb and Ayanna found themselves on the bunkhouse porch. It hadn't been planned. He'd come to check if she needed more firewood. She'd been sitting there watching the stars emerge, thinking about Thomas. "You've done good work," Caleb said, standing at a respectful distance. "I keep my promises." "It's more than that. You've made a difference here. This place feels alive again." Ayanna didn't know what to say to that. Compliments made her uncomfortable. They felt like debts accumulating. "You were alone a long time," she said instead. It wasn't a question. 5 years since Sarah died. "I'm sorry." Silence settled between them, but it wasn't awkward, just two people who understood loss sitting with it. "Your husband," Caleb said carefully, "was he good to you?" Ayanna smiled, sad and genuine. "The best man I ever knew. That's why Victor hated him." The name hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Caleb filed it away, this small piece of her story, and didn't press for more. "My brother-in-law," Ayanna continued, surprising herself, "Thomas's younger brother. He wanted to marry me before Thomas did. When I chose Thomas instead, Victor never forgave either of us. Is he the reason you left? He's part of it." High above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, the same stars that had guided her ancestors across these lands long before there were ranches or fences or white men drawing lines and calling them borders. "Whatever you're running from," Caleb said quietly, "you're safe here for as long as you need to be." It was a promise he had no authority to make. The world didn't work that way. Safety wasn't something one man could guarantee another, especially not when that other was an Apache woman with 4 children and enemies she hadn't fully explained. But sitting there in the December cold, watching her children sleep safely inside a warm bunkhouse, eating regular meals for the first time in months, Ayanna let herself believe it. Just for tonight, she let herself believe in safety. Tomorrow would come with its own troubles. Tomorrow always did. But tonight, under stars that remembered when her people owned every horizon, Ayanna White Eagle allowed herself to hope. It was dangerous, that hope, fragile as new ice, easy to break. But it was there, and for now, that was enough. 3 weeks after Ayanna White Eagle arrived at Morrison Ranch, Caleb needed supplies from town, grain for the horses, nails for fence repair, coffee because Pete threatened mutiny without it. Simple errands, the kind he'd done 100 times before without thinking. But this time, Ayanna insisted on coming along. "I need fabric," she said, standing in the barn doorway with that particular set to her shoulders that meant arguing would be pointless. "The children are growing. Their clothes won't last another month." Caleb set down the harness he'd been oiling. "Town's not friendly. You saw that when you first arrived." "I know, but I can't hide on this ranch forever. I need fabric and I have money now." She held up the coins from her first week's wages, clutched in her palm like precious stones. "I go." He studied her face, saw the determination there, and recognized something he'd felt himself after Sarah died. That moment when you had to step back into the world, even knowing the world would hurt you because the alternative was disappearing entirely. "All right, we'll take the wagon. All 4 kids, too. They need to see their mother doesn't run from stairs." So they went to Durango on a Saturday morning when Main Street would be packed with ranchers and housewives doing their weekly shopping. The worst possible time for an Apache woman to show her face. Or maybe Caleb thought the best time, get it over with all at once. The stares started before they'd even tied up the wagon. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Women pulled their children closer. Men's eyes narrowed with suspicion, or worse. Caleb had lived in this town his entire life, had been born in the hospital 3 blocks away, had buried his wife in the cemetery on the hill. These people knew him. But that didn't mean they'd accept what he'd done, bringing Indians onto his land, eating at his table, treating them like human beings, instead of problems to be solved or ignored. Ayanna walked with her head high, one hand holding Nako's cradleboard, the other holding Tala's small fingers. Casa and Mika followed, close, eyes wide, but mouths shut. They'd been trained in silence, the way only children living in hostile territory could be trained. The Mercantile was the largest store on Main Street, 3 stories of dry goods and hardware, and everything a ranch might need. Caleb had been shopping there since he was tall enough to reach the counter. The owner, Marcus Webb, had extended his family credit during 2 drought years that would have broken them otherwise. But Marcus wasn't at the counter today. His son was. 22 years old, back from a year at college in Denver, full of ideas about racial purity and the natural order of things. Caleb had heard him holding forth at the saloon, spewing the kind of poison that was becoming fashionable in certain circles. The younger Webb watched them enter with eyes like a snake watching mice. Ayanna went straight to the fabric section, her movements efficient and purposeful. She examined bolts of cotton, checking quality, with fingers that knew textiles, calculating in her head how much she'd need for growing children. She selected a sturdy blue calico, nothing fancy, nothing that would draw attention. She carried it to the counter, set it down carefully, and placed her coins beside it. 4 yards, please. The younger Webb looked at the fabric, then at her, then at the coins. We don't serve your kind here. The words dropped into the quiet store like stones into still water. Other customers stopped browsing, turned to watch. This was better than theater. Ayanna didn't flinch. I have money, American money. I want to buy fabric. Don't care what kind of money you've got. Don't care what you want to buy. People like you aren't welcome in this establishment. Caleb stepped forward, keeping his voice level with effort. The lady has money. She wants to make a purchase. Sell her the fabric, Tom. Tom Webb's face flushed red. Mr. Morrison, with all due respect, you shouldn't be encouraging this. Bringing Indians into town, into white establishments. It's not natural. It's not right. What's not right, Caleb said, his voice dropping to something dangerous, is refusing service to a paying customer. Now sell her the damn fabric. I don't have to sell anything to anyone I don't want to sell to. That's my right as a business owner. The silence in the store had weight now, pressure. Every eye was on them. Every ear was listening. This was the moment when Caleb Morrison would either back down or make himself an outcast alongside the woman and children he'd taken in. He didn't back down. Then I'll buy it. Ring up 4 yards of that calico and add it to whatever else I need today. Tom Webb's jaw worked, but he was trapped. He couldn't refuse to sell to Caleb, not without insulting one of the ranch's best customers. His hands shook slightly as he measured out the fabric cut. It folded it with more force than necessary. When they left the store, Ayanna carried her fabric wrapped in brown paper. Her face was expressionless, but Caleb could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her jaw was clenched. I'm sorry, he said quietly as they loaded supplies into the wagon. Don't be. I've heard worse. I've survived worse. But the day wasn't finished with them yet. They were loading the last of the supplies when a group of men approached. 5 of them led by Dale Briggs, a rancher whose operation had been failing for years. Briggs blamed everyone but himself for his misfortunes. The government, the banks, the weather, Mexicans, Indians, anyone who made a convenient target. Morrison, Briggs called out loud enough for half the street to hear. Heard you're running a charity for Indians now. Caleb kept loading supplies, didn't turn around. Just running my ranch, Dale, same as always. With a squaw and her half-breed brats. That's not running a ranch. That's something else entirely. The slur hung in the air like gun smoke. Casa's hands balled into fists. Ayanna put a hand on her son's shoulder, a warning to stay calm, stay quiet, stay alive. Caleb finally turned around, and something in his face made Briggs take half a step back to spite himself. "You want to finish that thought, Dale, because I'm real interested to hear the rest of it." Briggs had 4 men backing him. Caleb was alone. But Caleb Morrison was 6 feet of ranch-hardened muscle, and he'd served in France in 1918, had seen things in those trenches that made bar fights look like Sunday picnics. Everyone who'd been in town that long knew it. "I'm just saying what everyone's thinking," Briggs continued, but with less confidence. "It's not natural. White man like you, with property like yours, you could have any decent woman in this county. Instead, you've got yourself an Indian woman and her kids living on your land. People talk Morrison. They wonder what exactly goes on out there." The implication was clear. The insult to Ayanna was deliberate. Caleb took a step forward, then another. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't need to. Let them talk. Let them wonder. I don't give a damn what ignorant men think about me or my ranch or the people I choose to help. Help. Briggs laughed ugly and sharp. That what you call it. Before Caleb could respond, a new voice cut through the tension. "Dale Briggs, you've got a mouth awful big for a man who owes me $47 in back rent." Elena Rodriguez emerged from her boarding house across the street, wiping her hands on her apron. She was maybe 5'3" and built like a bird, but she had the presence of a general and the tongue of a sergeant. "This isn't your business, Elena," Briggs muttered. "Becomes my business when you're harassing people in front of my establishment. Drives away customers. Bad for commerce." She turned to Caleb. "Mr. Morrison, if you need anything else, you come to my place. I buy in bulk, get better prices than that mercantile anyway. Any friend who pays their bills is welcome." Briggs sputtered. "You're defending Indians now. I'm defending honest people who pay their debts." "Which is more than I can say about you." She looked at Ayanna directly. "You need fabric, good fabric. I know a woman in Farmington who weaves, beautiful work. Half the price of that overpriced cotton web sells." The confrontation had shifted, the momentum broken. Briggs and his men retreated with muttered curses, salvaging what dignity they could. The crowd that had gathered began to disperse, disappointed. The situation hadn't escalated to violence. Elena beckoned them toward her boarding house. "Come, I made coffee, real coffee, not the burnt swill they serve at the diner." The boarding house kitchen was warm and smelled like cinnamon and yeast. Elena's boarding house catered to traveling salesmen and ranch hands between jobs, but the kitchen was her domain, and she ruled it with efficiency and grace. She poured coffee for Caleb and Ayanna, set out milk and fresh cookies for the children. The kids hesitated until Ayanna nodded permission, then ate with the careful politeness of children who knew how to behave in someone else's home. "Thank you," Ayanna said quietly. "You didn't have to help." Elena waved a hand dismissively. 20 years ago I came to this town speaking only Spanish, pregnant, no husband. People treated me like trash, called me things I won't repeat in front of children." She took a sip of coffee. "One woman helped me, Judge Hayes's mother, God rest her. Gave me a job, gave me a chance. I never forgot that kindness. And I never forgave this town's cruelty." "That's why you helped us?" Caleb asked. "That and Dale Briggs is a pendejo who deserves to be put in his place whenever possible." She smiled at Ayanna. "Besides, you need anything fabric, food, someone to talk to you, come here. Front door or back door, whichever is more comfortable. My house welcomes honest people." Ayanna's eyes glistened. It was the first open hand of friendship extended to her by another woman since leaving the reservation. "Thank you, Senora." "Elena, just Elena." She turned to the children. "You know I have 6 grandchildren in Santa Fe. They're loud, always hungry, completely wonderful. You remind me of them." Mika's face brightened. "You have grandchildren. 6 3 boys, 3 girls, all terrors, all treasures." As the children warmed to Elena's easy manner, asking about her grandchildren and telling her about the chickens at the ranch, Caleb and Ayanna exchanged a look. The same thought passing between them here was an ally. Unexpected, fierce, genuine. They didn't know how much they'd need her until 3 days later, when the letter arrived. The postal carrier came to Morrison Ranch on a Wednesday afternoon. He was a young man, barely 20, nervous about the errand he'd been sent on. "Mr. Morrison, got mail here for," he consulted the envelope, "Ayanna White Eagle. That the Indian woman staying here." Caleb took the letter, noted the official seal, the Bureau of Indian Affairs letterhead. His stomach dropped. "I'll make sure she gets it." The postal carrier lingered, clearly curious, but Caleb's expression sent him on his way. He found Ayanna in the barn teaching Casa how to properly brush down a horse. The peaceful domestic scene felt fragile, suddenly, like glass about to shatter. "Letter came for you," he said. "From the BIA." Her face went pale beneath its bronze. She took the envelope with trembling hands, but she didn't open it immediately, just stood there, holding it like it might explode. "Would you like me to leave?" Caleb asked. She shook her head, broke the seal red. He watched her face change, watched hope drain away and be replaced by fear, then determination, then something close to despair. When she finished reading, she handed him the letter without a word. The language was bureaucratic, cold, efficient. But the threat was crystal clear. Ayanna White Eagle was being ordered to return to the Southern Ute Reservation within 30 days, or face loss of tribal benefits and potential protective action regarding her minor children. Furthermore, Victor White Eagle had filed for guardianship of all 4 children, citing her inability to provide adequate care and her abandonment of the tribal community. A hearing was scheduled for March 15, 1943 at the BIA office in Durango. Failure to appear would result in a default judgment in Victor's favor. It was dated January 28th. Today was January 31st. She had 6 weeks. "He found us," Ayanna whispered. "He found us, and now he'll take them." Casa, who had heard everything, stepped forward. "He won't. We'll fight him. Casa inside, now." Ayanna's voice was sharp with fear, masquerading as anger. The boy wanted to argue, but something in his mother's face stopped him. He gathered his sisters and retreated to the bunkhouse, looking back over his shoulder with eyes too old for 8 years. When they were alone, Ayanna turned to Caleb. Her face was composed now. Decision made. "I'm leaving. Tomorrow. I'll take the children, go far. Mexico, maybe? Or Canada. Somewhere the BIA can't find us. Running won't solve this. Staying means losing them. You don't understand. Indian courts always side with men, with family. Victor is family. I'm just a woman." "Not if you're not just a woman." She looked at him sharply. "What does that mean?" "It means we need a lawyer. Someone who knows these laws, knows how to fight them." "I don't have money for a lawyer." "I have money." "No." The word came out fierce. "I don't take charity. I work. I pay my own way." "Then work for me the rest of your life and call it even." The words hung between them, loaded with implications neither of them was ready to examine. "Why?" Ayanna's voice broke slightly. "Why do you care so much?" Caleb took a breath, let himself be honest, in a way he hadn't been since Sarah died. 2 months ago, this place was dead. I was just going through motions, existing, not living. Then you showed up and suddenly there's noise. There's laughter, Mika singing to chickens, Casa trying to ride like cavalry, Tala following Pete around like he's her grandfather. This place came alive again. He paused, met her eyes directly. "And because I know what it feels like to lose everything, I won't sit by and watch you lose those children without fighting back." Tears spilled down Ayanna's cheeks. She wiped them away, angrily ashamed of the weakness. "I can't pay you back, ever." "I'm not asking you to." The next morning, they went to see Margaret Steele. Her office was above a bakery on Durango's less fashionable end of Main Street. 2 flights of narrow stairs led to a door with a simple brass plate, "Margaret Steele, Attorney at Law." One of only 3 female lawyers in Colorado, and the only one who'd take cases nobody else wanted. The office was small, crowded with law books and case files, hazy with cigarette smoke. Margaret herself was 54, sharp-eyed, and had no patience for nonsense. She looked up when they entered, taking in Caleb Morrison and an Apache woman with fear in her eyes. "You're here about the BIA letter," she said without preamble, gesturing to a newspaper on her desk. The headline read, "Indian Agent Seeks Custody of Apache Children." Ayanna stiffened. They made it public. Frank Jessup filed publicly on purpose. Wants to make an example. "Runaway Indian woman. They're calling you." Margaret lit a cigarette, blew smoke toward the ceiling. "Sit. Tell me everything." So Ayanna told her story. The forced marriage demand, Thomas's suspicious death, Victor's threats, the flight from the reservation, the trek to Durango, finding Morrison Ranch. Margaret took notes, asked sharp questions, showed no sympathy but clear belief. When Ayanna finished, the lawyer sat back thinking. "Boarding school threat is real," she said finally. "BIA policy, if Indian children don't have adequate guardianship, they get placed in government schools. Strip their language, their culture, their family. Legally sanctioned cultural genocide." "I know," Ayanna said quietly. "My cousin. They took her when she was 6. She came back 8 years later. Didn't speak Apache, didn't know her own mother. I won't let that happen, but here's the problem. Indian law is complicated. Technically, the BIA has jurisdiction over reservation Indians. You're Apache. Victor lives on the reservation. He has tribal support." Caleb leaned forward. "What if she wasn't under their jurisdiction anymore?" Margaret's eyebrows rose. Meaning what if she wasn't a single Apache woman? What if she was married to a white landowner? "Marriage," Margaret said slowly, understanding. "You're suggesting they get married." The word fell into the room like a bomb. Ayanna stood abruptly. "No." "Ayanna," Caleb started. "I won't marry for papers, not again." Her voice was bitter sharp with old pain. "Thomas married me young. For love, yes, but also to protect me. His family wanted to force me to marry Victor even then. Thomas said, 'Marry me, you'll be safe.' It worked. For a while. Then he died, and the protection disappeared." She looked at both of them, eyes bright with unshed tears. "I don't want to be protected. I want to be free." Margaret's voice gentled slightly. "Ayanna, I understand. But legally, as a single Indian woman who left the reservation, you have almost no rights. If you marry a white landowner, the law changes. You become his legal dependent, yes. But that also means the BIA can't touch you without going through him." "Think of it as a legal shield," Caleb added. "A shield that makes me property." "Not property, partner." Margaret stubbed out her cigarette. "He's right. If you marry, file for joint guardianship, establish residence on his land, this case moves to civil court, not BIA jurisdiction. I can fight that. I can win that." "And if we don't marry," Margaret's face was grim, "they'll take your children. Maybe not immediately, but Victor has money from government benefits from his own children, plus what he'll get from yours. $85 a month. He can afford to keep fighting. Can you—" The brutal truth settled over them like ash. Ayanna sat back down slowly, the fight draining out of her. "If we marry, you can save my children. I can try, no guarantees, but it gives us a fighting chance. And if we don't, Victor gets them, possibly within weeks." Silence filled the small office. Through the window, Durango went about its business, unconcerned with the fate of one Apache woman and 4 children whose futures hung in the balance. Ayanna looked at Caleb, really looked at him. This man who had stopped for strangers on a frozen road, who had given them shelter and food and work and dignity, who was now offering to tie his life to hers permanently, to take on her battles as his own, to risk his standing in this community for people he'd known less than a month. "Why would you do this?" she asked. "Really? Why would you marry someone you barely know to fight a battle that isn't yours?" Caleb's answer was simple, honest, devastating. "Because a month ago, I was half dead, going through motions. The ranch was running, but I wasn't living. Then you showed up, and I remembered what it felt like to have purpose, to matter, to be needed." He paused. "I'm not asking you to love me. I'm asking you to let me help save your family, because maybe saving your family will save me too." In that moment, in that smoke-filled office above a bakery in Durango, Colorado, Ayanna, White Eagle, faced an impossible choice. Marry a man she barely knew, surrender her hard-won independence, become legally bound to someone who could turn out to be as controlling as Victor, or refuse, maintain her freedom, and watch her children be taken away to a man who saw them as income, who might have killed their father, who would destroy everything Thomas had loved about them. Some choices aren't really choices at all. Margaret Steele watched them both, her sharp lawyer's eyes seeing everything, judging nothing. "You don't have to decide today," she said quietly. "But the hearing is March 15th. That's 6 weeks. If you're going to do this, we need time to file paperwork, establish legal precedent, build a case. Every day you wait makes it harder to win." Ayanna stood, walked to the window, looked out at the town that had rejected her, at the mountains that had once belonged to her people, at the sky that stretched forever and promised nothing. Behind her, Caleb waited, patient, offering salvation that came with strings, even if those strings were tied with good intentions. "I need to think," she said finally. "Give me tonight. I'll have an answer tomorrow." They left Margaret Steele's office with the weight of impossible decisions pressing down on them. In 6 weeks, everything would be decided. Freedom or family, independence or survival, the choice that was no choice at all. That night, Ayanna sat in the bunkhouse after her children were asleep, holding Thomas's turquoise stone, whispering prayers to a dead husband who couldn't answer. And Caleb Morrison sat in his ranch house kitchen, wondering if he'd just made the best offer of his life or the worst mistake. The clock was ticking. Victor was coming. And time, as it always did, was running out. Ayanna White Eagle didn't sleep that night. She sat by the bunkhouse window wrapped in Thomas's blanket, watching stars wheel overhead like they had for 1,000 generations before white men drew borders and called them law. The turquoise stone Thomas had given her on their wedding day lay warm in her palm. She'd carried it through everything, through 4 births. Through the day they told her he was dead. Through 32 miles of frozen road with children clinging to her skirts. Through doorways that slammed in her face and a town that saw her skin before it saw her humanity. Now it was asking her to choose between the freedom she'd fought for and the children she'd died to protect. Some choice. Behind her, Casa stirred in his sleep, murmured something in Apache that sounded like Papa. The word pierced her chest like an arrow. These children had already lost one father. Now she was considering giving them another, not from love, but from necessity, not from choice, but from desperation. Was that fair to them? Was it fair to Caleb Morrison, this quiet man who'd stopped on a frozen road because an 8-year-old boy waved at him? The question that haunted her most. Was it fair to Thomas's memory? Dawn came eventually, the way it always did, indifferent to human suffering. Ayanna rose, dressed, braided her hair with hands that shook slightly. She woke her children gently, got them ready for the day, made breakfast from the supplies Caleb provided. Normal morning routines that felt anything but normal. Caleb was already in the barn when she found him mucking stalls like the world wasn't waiting for her answer. He looked up when she entered, and something in his face told her he hadn't slept much either. "I'll marry you," she said without preamble. No poetry, no romance, just brutal practicality. For the children, to keep them safe. But I need you to understand something. He set down his pitchfork, gave her his full attention. "This is a business arrangement. Legal protection, nothing more. I'll be a good wife in all the ways that matter for the law. I'll keep your house, cook your food, help run your ranch. But my heart," she touched her chest where Thomas's stone hung beneath her shirt, "my heart is buried with my husband. I can't give you what I gave him. I'm not asking for your heart, Ayanna. I'm asking to help protect your children. Then we understand each other. We do. He paused. But I want you to know something too. I'm not asking you to forget Thomas. I'm not trying to replace him. Sarah's been gone 5 years, and there are still mornings I wake up reaching for her. Some losses don't heal. They just learn to hurt less. For the first time since Thomas died, Ayanna felt seen by someone who understood, not pitied, not judged, just understood. When? She asked. Margaret said as soon as possible. The sooner we're legally married, the sooner we can file the paperwork, the stronger our case. He met her eyes. Is tomorrow too soon? Tomorrow. One day to prepare for a marriage that would change everything. Tomorrow is good. They told the children that evening after supper with Pete sitting quiet in the corner, providing silent support. Ayanna had agonized over how to explain it, how to make them understand that this wasn't a betrayal of their father, but a protection of their future. In the end, she just told them the truth. Mr. Morrison and I are getting married tomorrow. 4 pairs of eyes stared at her. Kasa's went hard and angry, Mika's filled with confused tears. Tala just watched silent as always. Naka was too young to understand babbling happily in his mother's lap. Why, Kasa's voice cracked on the word. You don't love him. You love Papa. I do love your Papa. I always will. But Victor is trying to take you away from me, and this is how we stop him. Mr. Morrison is a good man. He'll protect us. We don't need protection. I'll protect us. Kasa was on his feet now, small fists clenched, trying to be brave, trying to be the man of the family at 8 years old. Ayanna pulled him close even as he tried to resist. You are so brave, little eagle, so strong. But this fight needs more than bravery. It needs the law. And the law says a white man's wife has rights a single Indian woman doesn't have. It's not fair. No, it's not. But it's the world we live in. Mika's small voice cut through the tension. Will he be our new Papa? The question hung in the air, loaded with implications nobody was ready to address. Caleb, who'd been standing awkwardly by the door, knelt down to Mika's level. I won't ever try to replace your father, he said quietly. From what your mamas told me, he was a good man. The kind of man who deserves to be remembered. I'm just someone who wants to help keep you safe, that's all. Can I still call you Mr. Morrison? Mika asked her 6-year-old logic, trying to sort through complicated adult emotions. You can call me whatever makes you comfortable. Tala, who hadn't spoken in weeks, walked up to Caleb and just stared at him, studying his face like she was trying to read his soul. After a long moment, she reached out one small hand and touched his knee. Not a hug, not acceptance, just acknowledgement that he existed, that he might be safe. It was more than Ayanna had hoped for. The wedding was set for noon the next day. Not a ceremony, really. Just a legal formality at Margaret Steele's office with a justice of the peace to sign the papers. No white dress, no flowers, no celebration. But Pete Garcia had other ideas. The old man appeared at the bunkhouse before sunrise, dressed in his Sunday best, carrying a bouquet of winter wildflowers he'd somehow found despite the February cold. You're getting married, he said in Spanish, pressing the flowers into Ayanna's hands. Even if it's for papers, even if it's for the law, you deserve flowers. Every bride deserves flowers. The gesture broke something in Ayanna's carefully maintained composure. Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. Thank you, Pete. Also, he continued in English, switching languages the way he always did when emotion ran high. I told Elena, she's bringing a dress, says no woman marries in work clothes if she can help it, not even for business. Pete, you didn't have to, wanted to. You've been good for this ranch, good for Caleb, good for me. We're family now. Family takes care of family. An hour later, Elena Rodriguez arrived with a dress wrapped in tissue paper. Not white, not fancy, just a simple dress in deep blue, the kind a respectable ranch wife might wear to church. It fit Ayanna perfectly because Elena was a woman who knew how to judge sizes and because kindness has its own kind of magic. "Something borrowed," Elena said, pinning Ayanna's hair up with silver combs. "Something blue. No time for something old or new, but 2 out of 4 isn't bad." Ayanna looked at herself in the small mirror. She barely recognized the woman staring back. Not the desperate mother who'd fled the reservation, not the grieving widow, someone in between, someone becoming. "I don't know how to thank you. Be happy, or at least be safe. That's thanks enough." They were loading into Caleb's truck, preparing to drive to town, when the sound of an approaching vehicle made everyone freeze. A dust plume rose in the distance, moving fast down the ranch road. Not the slow approach of a neighbor, not the casual pace of a delivery. This was someone coming with purpose. The vehicle materialized as it got closer, a BIA truck, government green official seal on the door. And, driving it with 2 reservation police officers in the back, was Victor White Eagle. Ayanna's blood turned to ice water. "Get the children inside," Caleb said quietly, his voice taking on an edge Ayanna had never heard before. "Pete, go with them. Lock the doors." "Caleb, inside, now. This is my land and I'll handle this." Pete herded the children toward the bunkhouse casa, resisting every step, wanting to stay, to fight to protect his mother. Ayanna stood frozen between the truck and the house, caught between running and standing her ground. Victor's truck pulled to a stop 20 feet away. He stepped out slowly, deliberately, letting them see the uniform he wore, not his own clothes. He was dressed as a tribal police officer, borrowed authority draped over his shoulders like a cloak. He was 32, but looked older, hardened by bitterness and alcohol, and whatever darkness lived in men who saw family as property to be controlled. He had Thomas's eyes, Thomas's cheekbones, Thomas's height. But where Thomas had been gentle, Victor was cruel. Where Thomas had been patient, Victor was demanding. He looked at Ayanna the way a man looks at a horse he's planning to break. "Sister," he said in Apache, the word dripping with false affection, "you've led us on quite a chase." Caleb stepped between them. "You're on private property. State your business or leave." Victor's eyes flicked to Caleb with barely concealed contempt. "White man, this is Indian business. The woman and children belong on the reservation. The woman and children are under my protection." "Your protection?" Victor laughed, sharp and ugly. "You think keeping a squaw in your bunkhouse gives you rights over tribal members? The BIA has jurisdiction. I have paperwork." He pulled folded documents from his jacket. "Custody petition, approved by tribal council, signed by Agent Jessup. Those children are coming with me today." "Like hell they are." The 2 men faced each other across the dirt of Morrison Ranch, and the tension was thick enough to choke on. The tribal police officers shifted uncomfortably in the truck bed, clearly uncertain about this situation, about escalating a confrontation with a white landowner on his own property. Ayanna found her voice. "You killed him." Victor's head snapped toward her. "What did you say?" "Thomas, you killed him. That lumber accident wasn't an accident. I know it, you know it, everyone knows it." "You're insane with grief. My brother died in a tragic accident. Your brother died because you wanted me, and you wanted his land, and you wanted the children's benefits. $85 a month for 4 kids adds up, doesn't it, Victor? Enough to keep you in whiskey and cards." Victor's face went dark with rage. He took a step toward her, and Caleb moved like a striking snake, putting himself physically between them. "You don't touch her. You don't even look at her wrong. This is my land, and on my land my rules apply." "Your rules don't mean anything when federal law says those children belong with family." "Then it's a good thing," Caleb said quietly, dangerously, "that as of 30 minutes from now, I'll be her husband. Which makes me family too, legal family, the kind that trumps tribal jurisdiction." Victor's face went through a series of transformations: shock, disbelief, rage, then something worse, calculation. "You're marrying her, white man, like you marrying Indian trash, ruining your reputation. You're standing in this community for what used goods with 4 half-breed brats." Caleb hit him. One punch, clean and fast, that sent Victor sprawling in the dirt. The tribal police officers half rose, hands going to weapons, but Caleb's voice stopped them cold. "Anyone else wants to try, come ahead, but you're on my land and I've got every right to defend it and the people on it, including my bride." Victor wiped blood from his lip, looked up at Caleb with pure hatred. "This isn't over. Marriage or not, those children are Indian. BIA still has say. The hearing is in 6 weeks. We'll see what a judge says about this arrangement. We'll be there. With a lawyer, with legal marriage papers, with every right to raise these children that you claim to want." Caleb leaned down, voice dropping to something quiet and deadly. "And if I ever hear you've laid hands on Ayanna again, if I ever hear you've threatened these children, there won't be enough of you left for the reservation police to identify." It was a threat. Clear, unambiguous. The kind that could get a man arrested for assault if anyone felt like pursuing it. Nobody did. Victor climbed to his feet, spit blood, looked at Ayanna one last time. "You'll regret this. All of this. When the courts take those children, when they put them in boarding school, when you never see them again, you'll remember you chose this." He got back in his truck, slammed the door hard enough to make the whole vehicle shake. The engine roared to life and the BIA truck tore out of Morrison Ranch, leaving dust and threat and the echoes of violence in its wake. Ayanna was shaking. Caleb's hand was already swelling from the punch. And somewhere in the bunkhouse, 4 children had just witnessed their mother's enemy come to take them away. "We need to go," Caleb said, flexing his injured hand. "Right now. Get married before he finds some way to stop us." They made it to town in record time, Caleb driving like the law itself was chasing them. Maybe it was. Margaret Steele met them at her office, took one look at their faces, at Caleb's swelling knuckles, and said simply, "What happened?" "Victor showed up at the ranch," Ayanna said. "Tried to take the children. Caleb stopped him." Margaret's expression went grim. "This makes it more urgent. If Victor files assault charges, claims you're violent, unstable, then we'd better make sure I'm a legally married man protecting his family, not just some white guy beating up Indians on his property." Caleb's voice was tight. "Can we do this now, right now?" 20 minutes later, in Margaret Steele's cramped office with Pete Garcia and Elena Rodriguez as witnesses, Ayanna White Eagle and Caleb Morrison stood before Justice of the Peace Howard Mitchell and spoke vows that were legal if not romantic. "Do you, Caleb James Morrison, take this woman?" Caleb's voice was steady. "I do." "Do you, Ayanna White Eagle, take this man?" She thought of Thomas, thought of her children, thought of Victor's hatred and boarding schools and everything she stood to lose. "I do." The justice pronounced them married. Caleb signed papers. Ayanna made her mark her X next to his signature because she could read, but writing English still came hard. Margaret signed as legal witness. Pete and Elena signed as character witnesses. Just like that, with ink on paper and words in a dusty office, Ayanna White Eagle became Ayanna Morrison. There was no kiss, no embrace. Just a handshake between husband and wife, a business arrangement sealed, a legal shield raised against enemies who would take everything. But Pete had brought a camera. He insisted on one photograph. Something for the children, he said. Something to prove this was real. In that photograph, taken in the harsh light of a February afternoon, Ayanna Morrison stands next to her new husband in a borrowed blue dress holding borrowed wildflowers. She's not smiling, but she's not crying either. She looks like a woman who has made an impossible choice and is living with it. Caleb stands beside her hand, bandaged from punching her brother in, lockjaw set with determination. He looks like a man who has decided to fight and will not back down. They look like soldiers going to war. They look like survivors. They look like family. That night back at Morrison Ranch, they gathered everyone in the main house. Pete cooked a meal that was half celebration, half war council. Elena stayed, insisting someone needed to bear witness to this strange new family being born from necessity and defiance. The children were quiet, processing, Casa still angry. Mika confused, Tala watching everything, Nako oblivious happy just to have food and warmth, and people who smiled at him. After dinner, after Elena had gone home and Pete had retreated to his quarters, Ayanna stood in the ranch house kitchen with her new husband, unsure of what came next. "The bunkhouse, or here?" Caleb asked quietly. Where do you want to sleep, you and the kids? The bunkhouse is yours for as long as you want it, but legally, for this to look real, you probably should be in the main house. Your choice. The main house. The white man's house." Thomas's voice in her memory. "Never trust a white man who offers you his home. They always want something in return." But Caleb Morrison had offered everything and asked for nothing, had married her to save her children, had punched a man for threatening her, had given her a shield when the whole world was armed against her. "The children stay in the bunkhouse for now," she said slowly. "Until they're ready, but she took a breath. "I'll stay here, to make it look real. Guest room is down the hall, door locks from inside. You'll have privacy." Of course he'd thought of that. Of course he'd protect even that. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for trusting me enough to try." Later, after the children were settled in the bunkhouse with Pete sleeping nearby to guard them, after the ranch had gone quiet and the stars came out, Ayanna stood in the guest room of Caleb Morrison's house and cried. She cried for Thomas, her first love, her true love whose memory she was honoring in the only way she knew how, by protecting the children they'd made together. She cried for the freedom she'd surrendered, the independence she'd fought for the self she was burying beneath the name Morrison. She cried for her children who deserved better than a mother who married for legal protection instead of love. But mostly, she cried with relief. Because for the first time since Thomas died, since Victor made his threats, since she walked 32 miles with 4 frightened children, she had something resembling power. Paper power. Legal power, the kind that might be enough to keep her family intact. In his own room down the hall, Caleb Morrison lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering what he'd just committed himself to. A marriage without love. A family without blood. A fight that could cost him everything he'd built. But when he thought about Ayanna's face when Victor threatened her children, when he remembered Casa's small hand waving from the roadside, when he pictured what Morrison Ranch had become, in just 4 weeks full of life and laughter and purpose, he knew he'd made the right choice. Love could grow, or it couldn't. Either way, he'd help save those children. Either way, he'd found a reason to wake up in the morning. Outside, the February wind blew cold across Morrison Ranch, but inside a new family was taking its first uncertain breaths. The wedding was over. The real fight was just beginning. The first week of being Mrs. Caleb Morrison, Ayanna learned that marriage, even one built on legal necessity rather than love, changed everything. The children moved into the main house 3 days after the wedding, not because Caleb demanded it, but because Casa woke screaming from a nightmare about Victor dragging them away, and Ayanna realized they needed to see her, protected, needed to feel the solidity of walls and locks, and a man willing to fight for them. The house absorbed them the way drought land absorbs rain. Slowly at first, then all at once. Mika claimed a room with windows facing the chicken coop so she could wake to the sound of her beloved hens. Tala chose the smallest room corner positioned where she could see anyone approaching from 2 directions. Survival instinct in a 4-year-old. Casa took the room next to his mother's, close enough to protect her if needed, far enough to feel like the man of the family he was trying so desperately to be. Nako stayed in Ayanna's room in a proper cradle Caleb had pulled from storage. The same cradle that had held his own infant son dead these 5 years, another ghost-haunting Morrison Ranch. They were building something, not a family yet, but the foundation of one. Margaret Steele came to the ranch twice a week preparing for the March 15th hearing like a general preparing for war. She interviewed everyone, took statements, built a case file 3 inches thick, proving that Ayanna Morrison, wife of a respected rancher, mother of 4 healthy children, was not the unstable runaway Victor White Eagle claimed. "We need to prove competence," Margaret said one afternoon, spreading documents across the kitchen table. "Prove you're providing adequate care, adequate education, adequate everything. The BIA will argue you abandoned your community, that you're culturally isolated, that the children need to be with their people." "Their people?" Ayanna's voice was sharp. "Victor isn't their people. He's a drunk who sees government checks where he should see children." "I know that. You know that. We need to make a judge know that." Pete provided testimony about the ranch operations, how Ayanna worked harder than any hand he'd employed in 30 years. Elena Rodriguez documented every time Ayanna came to town for supplies, proving she wasn't hiding, wasn't running, wasn't afraid to be seen. Dr. Samuel Cross, the only doctor in Durango who'd treat Indians, examined all 4 children and declared them healthy, well-fed, showing no signs of neglect or abuse. The evidence was building. But so was the opposition. Word spread through Durango like wildfire. Caleb Morrison married an Indian woman, not just employing her, not just helping her. Married, with 4 half-breed children living in his house, eating at his table, taking his name. The whispers followed them everywhere. At the general store, where merchants now watched Ayanna like she might steal, despite paying cash for every purchase. At church, where families who'd known Caleb since childhood suddenly had other pews to occupy. At the feed supply, where conversation stopped when he walked in and didn't resume until he left. Dale Briggs, who'd confronted them on Main Street weeks ago, now held court at the saloon most nights, poisoning the town against them, saying things about what went on at Morrison Ranch, suggesting things about Caleb's relationship with Ayanna that made decent people uncomfortable and small-minded people gleeful. "Let them talk," Caleb said, when Ayanna apologized for the 100th time about the damage to his reputation. "I never gave a damn what they thought before, not starting now." But the talking had consequences. 2 of Caleb's ranch hands quit, saying their wives wouldn't allow them to work alongside an Indian woman. The bank manager, who'd been friendly for years, suddenly found reasons why the ranch's loan renewal needed additional scrutiny. The reverend, in a sermon that was pointed, if not explicit, spoke about the dangers of yoke joining with unbelievers, about maintaining the purity of Christian communities. Ayanna bore it all with dignity that came from a lifetime of weathering white people's disapproval. But it hurt Caleb in ways he didn't expect, watching his world contract, watching people he'd considered friends reveal themselves as something less. What he didn't tell Ayanna was that he'd also received 2 letters, typed, unsigned, threats about what happened to Indian lovers in certain parts of the territory. Warnings about houses that burned cattle, that died mysteriously, accidents that befell families who forgot their place. He burned the letters, bought more ammunition, slept lighter. The break in the case came from the last person anyone expected. It was early March, 2 weeks before the hearing, when a woman appeared at Morrison Ranch just after dawn. She arrived on foot, walking the 8 miles from town, carrying nothing but a canvas bag and desperation. Pete saw her first walking up the long drive, limping slightly, one arm wrapped around her ribs like they hurt. He got Caleb, who got Ayanna, and together they watched this stranger approach. She was maybe 30, Apache, with the kind of beauty that had been battered but not broken. Her lip was split. Her left eye was swollen nearly shut. Bruises mottled her neck and arms in shades of purple and yellow, new and old, a timeline of violence written on her skin. When she got close enough for Ayanna to see her face clearly, recognition hit like a lightning strike. Naomi White Eagle, Victor's wife. The woman who'd stood silent while Victor threatened Ayanna on the reservation, who'd watched him strike her and said nothing, who'd been married to him for 6 years and borne him 3 children, who never seemed quite happy, never quite safe. Ayanna, Naomi said in Apache, her voice rough from screaming or crying or both. I need help. They brought her inside, sat her at the kitchen table, gave her water and food she could barely eat through her damaged mouth. The children were quickly ushered outside with Pete, who understood without being told that this conversation wasn't for young ears. He did this? Ayanna asked, though she already knew the answer. Naomi nodded, winced at the movement. Last night. He was drunk, angry about the hearing about you marrying this man. She looked at Caleb with eyes that had seen too much. He said terrible things, said he'd kill you both before he let you keep those children, said he'd burn this ranch to ash. Did he send you here? Caleb asked carefully. To threaten us? No. Naomi's eyes filled with tears. I came myself, because I'm tired. Tired of being afraid. Tired of watching my children fear their father. Tired of knowing what he is and saying nothing. She reached into her canvas bag with shaking hands, pulled out a bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside was a ledger book, the kind used for accounting. She opened it to a marked page pointed to an entry dated 8 months ago. Thomas's death wasn't an accident. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. Ayanna went very still. What did you say? Your husband, Thomas. Victor killed him. Naomi's voice broke. I heard them arguing the day before, at our house. Victor was drunk, saying Thomas was weak, that he didn't deserve you, or the land, or the children. Thomas told him to leave, to stop coming around. Victor swore he'd make Thomas sorry. She flipped to another page, showed payment records in Victor's handwriting. The next day, Thomas died at the lumber mill. They said a cable snapped, that the logs crushed him, that it was bad luck and bad timing. But Victor came home that night with blood on his hands. Literal blood. He washed it off in our kitchen, told me if I ever said a word, he'd kill me and our children too. Tears spilled down her battered face. I've been too afraid to speak. But then he filed for custody of your children, and I knew he wanted them for the money, same reason he wanted to marry you. He sees children as income. $85 a month times 4. That's $340 a year. More than he makes in 6 months of actual work. Ayanna's hands were shaking so badly she had to clasp them together. You're saying my husband was murdered? That Victor murdered him? Yes. And you've known for 8 months? Yes. Naomi looked down, shame coloring her voice. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. But I was afraid. He said he'd take my children, put them in boarding school, where they'd forget me, forget everything. I couldn't risk it. Until last night, when he beat me so badly, I realized I'm going to die if I stay. My children are going to grow up watching their father kill their mother by inches. She looked at Caleb. You're a white man. The law listens to white men. If I testify, if I tell what I know, will you protect me, protect my children? Caleb looked at Ayanna, saw the war happening behind her eyes. This woman had stayed silent while Thomas was murdered, had watched Ayanna suffer and said nothing, had enabled Victor's cruelty through her fear. But she was also a victim, also a mother, also someone trying to save her children the only way she knew how. We'll protect you, Caleb said. All of you, I promise. Margaret Steele, when they called her out to the ranch that afternoon, nearly wept with professional satisfaction. This changes everything, she said, recording Naomi's statement word for word. Testimony from Victor's own wife. Evidence of violence, threats, murder. We can't prove the murder in criminal court, not without more evidence, but in family court, this is devastating. Will she be safe? Ayanna asked. If she testifies against him, she'll have to be. If Victor comes near her before the hearing, he violates a dozen laws. And after she testifies, Margaret looked at Naomi, you'll need to file for divorce. Leave the reservation. Start over somewhere he can't find you. I don't care where I go, Naomi said quietly, as long as my children are safe. The two women looked at each other. Sisters-in-law who'd never been friends, bonded now by shared suffering and the man who'd hurt them both. I'm sorry, Naomi whispered, for not speaking sooner, for letting you think you were alone. Ayanna was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached across the table, took Naomi's battered hand in her own. You're speaking now. That's what matters. The days before the hearing blurred together in a haze of preparation and dread. Margaret filed emergency protective orders. Naomi and her 3 children moved into the bunkhouse, creating a strange household of survivors. 7 children now, 2 Apache mothers, 1 widowed rancher trying to protect them all. The ranch became a fortress. Caleb bought more rifles, taught Ayanna and Naomi how to shoot properly, not just adequately. Pete slept in the barn with a loaded shotgun. Every night someone stood watch. Victor didn't come, but his presence haunted them anyway, a threat waiting in the darkness. The transformation in the children during those final 2 weeks was remarkable. Naomi's kids, who'd been silent and fearful, at first began to laugh, began to play with Casa and Mika and Tala like children should play, began to believe that maybe possibly they might be safe. And Casa, who'd been so angry about the marriage, began to soften toward Caleb. It happened slowly, small moments. Caleb teaching him to properly saddle a horse. Caleb showing him how to fix a fence post. Caleb telling stories about his own father, about learning ranch work the hard way, about being 8 years old and thinking he had to be a man. "You don't have to be a man yet," Caleb told him one evening while they were feeding the horses. "Being 8 is enough. Being a good son to your mother, a good brother to your sisters, that's enough. But who'll protect them if I don't?" Casa's voice was small, afraid, trying to be brave. "I will. That's my job now, not yours." "You're not my father." "No, I'm not. Your father was Thomas White Eagle, and from everything I hear, he was a good man, a better man than I'll ever be." Caleb knelt down to Casa's level. "But I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. And as long as I'm breathing, nothing will hurt your mother or your sisters. That's a promise." Casa studied his face for a long moment, Apache eyes trying to read white man truth. Whatever he saw there must have satisfied him, because he nodded once, sharp and decisive. "Okay." It wasn't acceptance, not yet, but it was the beginning of trust. The moment that changed everything came 3 days before the hearing. Caleb had taken Casa and the 2 oldest of Naomi's children to check fence lines in the north pasture, teaching them ranch work, giving Ayanna and Naomi time to prepare testimony with Margaret. It was late afternoon, the sun already thinking about setting, when one of the fence posts gave way, completely rotted through at the base. Caleb dismounted to examine it, and that's when they heard the sound, low, menacing, growing closer. A rattlesnake coiled in the rocks, angry at being disturbed, ready to strike. And Casa was standing right next to it. The boy froze. 8 years old, smart enough to know movement meant death. The snake's rattle increased tempo, a death march accelerating. Caleb moved without thinking, grabbed Casa, threw him backward toward the horses, put his own body between the boy and the snake. The rattler struck fangs, sinking into leather boot instead of child's flesh. Caleb killed it with his knife, 3 quick strikes, then checked himself for penetration. The fangs had gone through the boot, but not the thick wool sock underneath. No venom, no wound, just a close call that could have been a tragedy. When he turned around, Casa was staring at him with eyes huge in his small face. "You saved me." "Of course I did." "You could have been bit. You could have died." "Better me than you." Casa launched himself at Caleb's small arms wrapping around the big man's waist, face pressed against his shirt body, shaking with reaction and relief, and something bigger than both. "Papa," he whispered. "Not Mr. Morrison, not Caleb. Papa." The word hit Caleb like a physical blow. He stood there, this boy who wasn't his son, clinging to him, calling him father, and felt something in his chest crack open. All the grief he'd carried for 5 years, all the loneliness, all the empty mornings and silent evenings, and the ghost of a child who died before drawing breath. He knelt down, pulled Casa close, held him, while the boy cried, while the other children watched, while the sun set over Morrison Ranch and turned the sky the color of healing wounds. "I've got you," Caleb said, his own voice rough with emotion. "I've got you, and I'm not letting go." When they returned to the ranch, Casa ran to his mother, told her the whole story in breathless Apache, told her how Papa had saved him, how Papa had put himself in danger, how Papa had promised to never let go. Ayanna looked at Caleb over her son's head, and for the first time since they'd married, something besides gratitude showed in her eyes, something deeper, something that might, given time and care and the patience of two people learning to live together, become love. "Thank you," she said in English. Then, in Apache, "You are a good man, Caleb Morrison." It was the first time she'd used his given name, the first time she'd acknowledged him as more than just legal protection, the first time she'd seen him as the man he was, not just the shield he provided. That night, after the children were asleep and Naomi had retreated to the bunkhouse and Pete was standing his watch in the barn, Ayanna knocked on Caleb's bedroom door. He opened it, surprised. She stood in the hallway in her nightdress and Thomas's old blanket, looking young and frightened and determined. "I can't promise to love you," she said without preamble. "Not yet, maybe not ever. Thomas will always be my first love, my true love. But you saved my son today. You've saved all of us, really, and I think I could learn to care for you. If you're patient, if you're willing to let me grieve Thomas while building something with you." Caleb leaned against the doorframe. This woman who'd become his wife by law, if not by heart, offering him something precious and fragile. "I'm willing to wait as long as it takes. Sarah's been gone 5 years, and I still think about her every day. Some loves don't end. They just make room for new ones." Ayanna nodded, satisfied. She started to turn away, then stopped. "Casa called you Papa today. I know. Are you ready for that, for what it means?" "I'm ready to try." She smiled, small but genuine, the first real smile she'd given him since they married. "That's all any of us can do." The hearing was in 3 days. Victor was waiting. The law was waiting. The future was waiting. But tonight in Morrison Ranch, a family was becoming real, not through blood, not through romance, through sacrifice and protection, and a man willing to throw himself between a snake and a child that wasn't his, through choosing every day to show up, to fight, to care. 3 days until they faced Victor White Eagle in court. 3 days until the judge decided if love built from necessity was strong enough to stand against legal claim built from blood. 3 days until everything changed. But tonight they had this. A boy calling a good man Papa. A woman learning to trust again. A family built from broken pieces, fragile and fierce, and fighting for survival. Tomorrow would bring its battles. Tonight they had each other. And for now, that was enough. March 15, 1943, dawned cold and clear over Durango, Colorado. The kind of day where you could see the San Juan Mountains crisp against a sky so blue it hurt to look at. The kind of day that made promises about spring, about renewal, about things getting better. Ayanna Morrison didn't believe in promises anymore. She believed in preparation. She dressed carefully that morning in the blue dress Elena had given her for the wedding, hair braided and pinned with silver combs borrowed from Margaret Steele. She looked like a respectable rancher's wife, because that's what the law required her to be. But beneath the dress, against her skin, she wore Thomas's turquoise stone on a leather cord, a reminder of who she was beneath the performance. The children were ready before dawn. Casa in his best shirt, standing soldier straight, trying to be brave. Mika holding tight to Tala's hand, both girls silent and wide-eyed. Nako fussing in Ayanna's arms, too young to understand, but sensing the tension that filled Morrison Ranch like smoke. Caleb came out of his room in his Sunday suit, the one he'd worn to bury Sarah, the one that still smelled faintly of mothballs and grief. He looked at his family gathered in the kitchen, and something fierce crossed his face. "Whatever happens today," he said quietly, "we're together. That's what matters. We're together, and we fight together, and we don't give up." Pete Garcia appeared from the barn, also dressed in his best determined to attend despite Margaret's warning that his presence might not help. "Family supports family," he'd said in Spanish. "I've been with this ranch 30 years. I'm not sitting home while they try to tear it apart." Elena Rodriguez met them at the courthouse, bringing Naomi White Eagle and her 3 children, all of them dressed carefully, all of them terrified. Naomi's face had healed some in the past 2 weeks, but the bruises were still visible yellow and green, reminders of Victor's violence. "Remember what we practiced," Margaret told Naomi as they climbed the courthouse steps. "Tell the truth. Don't embellish. Don't get emotional if you can help it. Just tell what you saw, what you heard, what you know." The courtroom was packed. Word had spread through Durango like wildfire. Indian woman fighting for custody against her brother-in-law, white rancher who'd married her to protect her, accusations of murder and abuse. It was better than any picture show, and half the town had turned out to watch. Dale Briggs sat in the front row, arms crossed, smirking. Other ranchers filled the benches, some curious, some hostile, all judging. A few faces showed sympathy. Dr. Cross was there, the Reverend from the Methodist Church. Some of the hands who'd stayed loyal to Morrison Ranch when others had quit. And in the front row opposite, dressed in his best suit, hair slicked back, face composed into something that looked almost respectable, sat Victor White Eagle. He looked like a concerned family member, looked like a man who cared about his brother's children and wanted only to do right by them. If you didn't know better, if you couldn't see the calculation in his eyes, you might believe the performance. Next to him sat Frank Jessup, the BIA agent, and a tribal lawyer from the Southern Ute Reservation. They had paperwork. They had legal precedent. They had federal law on their side. But Margaret Steele had truth. And sometimes, if the judge was brave enough, truth was enough. The bailiff called the court to order. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Martha Catherine Hayes." Judge Hayes entered through the side door, and Ayanna felt her heart sink. She'd hoped for a man, someone who might see Caleb as a peer, someone swayed by male solidarity. Instead, they got a woman. 59 years old, silver-haired, with a face that gave nothing away, and eyes that had seen it all. Margaret had warned her. Judge Hayes is fair, but she's also a stickler for the law. She won't let emotion sway her. We need facts, evidence, legal precedent. Anything less, and we lose. The judge settled into her seat, reviewed the case file, with the kind of attention that suggested she took this seriously. Finally, she looked up at the assembled courtroom. "This is a custody hearing regarding 4 minor children, Casa Mika Tala and Naka White Eagle. The petitioner, Victor White Eagle, is seeking guardianship based on claims that the mother, Ayanna White Eagle Morrison, is unfit and unable to provide adequate care. Mrs. Morrison contests this claim." "Is that correct?" both lawyers affirmed. "Then let's proceed. Mr. Jessup, you may present your case." The BIA agent stood all bureaucratic efficiency and federal authority. He painted a picture of Ayanna as an unstable woman who'd abandoned her community, fled the reservation without permission, exposed her children to hardship and danger by walking 30 miles in winter cold. He presented documents showing she'd been ordered to return to tribal land, had refused, had instead married a white man in what was clearly a desperate attempt to avoid BIA jurisdiction. "These children are Apache," Jessup said, his voice carrying across the courtroom. "They belong with their people on their land, learning their culture. Mrs. Morrison has isolated them from their heritage, exposed them to a white household where they're the only Indians, where they'll grow up confused about their identity, caught between 2 worlds, and belonging to neither." He called Victor to testify. Victor took the stand and lied with the ease of long practice. Said he'd always cared for his brother's children, said he'd offered to help Ayanna after Thomas died, but she'd refused. Said he'd tried to keep the family together, but she'd run away in the night, taking the children into danger. "I just want them safe," Victor said, his voice breaking convincingly. "I want them to know who they are, To grow up Apache not ashamed of their blood. My brother would have wanted that. It was a masterful performance. Ayanna watched several jury members nodding along, sympathy blooming on their faces. Even knowing it was lies, even knowing the truth, she could see how convincing he was. Margaret's cross-examination was brutal. Mr. White Eagle, how much does the Bureau of Indian Affairs pay in monthly benefits for each dependent child on the reservation? Victor hesitated. I don't know the exact amount. Let me help. It's $21.25 per child. For 4 children, that's $85 a month. Is that correct? I suppose. And you currently receive benefits for your own 3 children, correct? That's $63.75 monthly. If you were granted guardianship of your nephews and niece, your total monthly income from government benefits alone would be $148.75. Do I have that right? I don't see what... Do I have that right, Mr. White Eagle? Yes. That's more than most ranchers make in a month of hard labor. Quite an incentive to seek custody, wouldn't you say? The tribal lawyer objected. Judge Hayes sustained it, but the seed was planted. Margaret pressed harder. Mr. White Eagle, where were you on the evening of June 12, 1942? I don't remember. That's 9 months ago. That's the evening before your brother Thomas died in what was ruled an accidental death at the lumber mill. Do you remember that evening now? Victor's face went carefully blank. I was probably home with my family. Were you? Because we have testimony that you were seen at your brother's home that evening, that you and Thomas had a violent argument, that you threatened him. That's a lie. Is it? We'll see. When Margaret called Naomi White Eagle to the stand, the courtroom went silent. Victor's face drained of color. The tribal lawyer scrambled through papers, clearly blindsided. Naomi walked to the stand like a woman walking to the gallows, but her voice when she spoke was steady. Margaret guided her through it gently. The years of abuse, the beatings, the threats. The night before Thomas died, when Victor came home drunk and angry, saying Thomas needed to be taught a lesson. What happened the day Thomas died? Margaret asked. He went to work like always. That afternoon they came to tell us there'd been an accident. Cables snapped. Logs fell. Thomas was crushed. Naomi's voice wavered, but held. Victor came home that night. There was blood on his hands, his clothes. He washed them in our kitchen sink, scrubbing and scrubbing. I asked what happened. He told me if I ever said a word about what I'd seen, he'd kill me and take our children away forever. What did you believe happened, Mrs. White Eagle? The tribal lawyer objected. Speculation, Your Honor. I'll allow it, Judge Hayes said quietly. Answer the question, Mrs. White Eagle. Naomi looked at Victor sitting there with murder in his eyes and found courage she didn't know she had. I believe my husband killed his brother. I believe he sabotaged the cable. I believe Thomas White Eagle was murdered so Victor could take his wife and his children and the money that came with them. The courtroom erupted. Judge Hayes banged her gavel, demanded order, threatened to clear the room. Victor was on his feet shouting that it was lies, that his wife was crazy, that she'd made it all up. Mister White Eagle, sit down or I'll hold you in contempt. Judge Hayes's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. The testimony continued. Dr. Cross confirmed Naomi's injuries, documented over years, consistent with repeated domestic violence. Elena Rodriguez testified about Ayanna's character, her work ethic, her devotion to her children. Pete Garcia spoke about the ranch, about how the children thrived there, how they were healthy and happy and loved. Then Caleb took the stand. He spoke simply, honestly, about finding them by the roadside, about offering shelter, about watching Ayanna work harder than anyone he'd ever known, about seeing children transform from frightened refugees to happy kids who laughed and played and felt safe. Why did you marry her? The tribal lawyer asked on cross-examination, trying to make it sound sordid. A white man with property, with standing in this community, why would you marry an Indian woman with 4 children? Caleb looked at Ayanna sitting at the defense table, with her hands folded, her face composed, her eyes showing everything she felt. Because the first time I saw her, she was sitting by the road with nothing. No food, no shelter, no hope. And her 8-year-old son stood up and said they needed to keep trying, that White Eagles don't surrender. Any woman who raised a boy that brave, that strong, that good, she's worth fighting for. He turned back to the lawyer. And because 2 months ago my ranch was empty, I was alone. I'd forgotten what it felt like to have purpose. Then they came, and suddenly there was life everywhere. Laughter, hope. Mika singing to chickens, Casa learning to ride, Tala finally talking after months of silence. I married her because she saved me as much as I saved her. The courtroom was silent. Even Dale Briggs had stopped smirking. And the children, the lawyer pressed. You expect this court to believe you care about Indian children like they're your own. I don't expect anything. But 3 days ago, Casa called me Papa. He did that because I put myself between him and a rattlesnake, because when it came down to it, his safety mattered more than mine. That's what being a father means. Not blood, choice. Every single day, choosing to show up, to protect, to love. Margaret stood. Your Honor, if I may, I'd like Casa White Eagle to testify. Judge Hayes frowned. He's 8 years old. Old enough to know who he feels safe with, old enough to have an opinion about his own future. The judge considered, then nodded. Keep it brief. Casa walked to the stand like he was walking into battle, small and fierce and absolutely determined. The bailiff brought over a phone book for him to sit on so he could see over the witness box. Margaret's questions were simple. Casa, do you know why we're here today? Yes, ma'am. Victor wants to take us away from Mama and Papa. When you say Papa, who do you mean? Mr. Morrison. Caleb, he's Papa now. Why do you call him that? Casa looked at Caleb, and 8 years old spoke truth that made grown men cry. Because he saved me, not just from the snake, from being afraid all the time. When Victor was on the reservation, I had to be big, had to protect Mama and my sisters because no one else would. But now Papa's there. He's bigger than Victor, stronger. He promised nothing would hurt us as long as he's alive. And I believe him. Do you want to go live with Victor? No, ma'am. The boy's voice was absolute. Victor's mean. He hits people. He made Mama cry. Papa makes her smile. What about your real father, Thomas White Eagle? Do you remember him? Yes, ma'am. I remember him every day. He was good. He was kind. He taught me things. Casa's voice got stronger. But he's dead. And Papa Caleb, he's here. Mama says we honor the dead by living good. I think Papa Thomas would want us to be safe and happy. Papa Caleb makes us safe and happy. Margaret had no more questions. The tribal lawyer tried to cross-examine, tried to trip up an 8-year-old boy, but Casa was unshakable. Judge Hayes called a recess. The courtroom emptied for lunch tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. Ayanna held her children close, Caleb's arm around them all. Margaret reviewing notes and preparing for closing arguments. When court reconvened, Margaret Steele gave the speech of her career. Your Honor, this case is not about race. It's not about culture. It's not even about the law, though the law is on our side. This case is about what's best for 4 children who've already lost too much. She paced in front of the bench, every word calculated for maximum impact. The petitioner wants you to believe blood makes family. That shared DNA means more than shared meals, shared laughter, shared safety. But I submit that blood doesn't make family. Love makes family. Choice makes family. Showing up every single day makes family. Ayanna Morrison didn't abandon her culture. She saved her children from a man who saw them as income. She walked 30 miles in December cold because staying meant losing them to boarding schools that would strip their language, their heritage, their identity. She fought for their right to be Apache on their own terms, not Victor White Eagle's terms. And Caleb Morrison? He didn't have to stop that day. didn't have to offer shelter, didn't have to marry a woman he barely knew to protect children that weren't his blood. But he did, because he's a good man who believes children deserve safety more than the law deserves obedience to racial boundaries. She turned to face Victor directly. The petitioner claims to care about these children, but he beat his own wife so badly she fled to us for protection. He threatened Ayanna with boarding schools. He's never asked what the children want, what they need, what they feel, because to him they're not people, they're government checks. Margaret's voice rose powerful, righteous. Blood doesn't make family, Your Honor. Sacrifice makes family. Love makes family. Choosing every day to put children first makes family. The Morrisons are family, not perfect, not traditional, but real. And those children deserve to stay where they're loved, where they're safe, where they're allowed to be children instead of victims. She sat down. The courtroom was silent. Judge Hayes reviewed her notes for what felt like hours. Finally, she looked up. "I'm going to tell you something I've never told a courtroom before," she said quietly. "My grandmother was Ute. My grandfather was a white farmer who married her over his family's objections. I grew up watching my mother navigate two worlds belonging fully to neither. I know what it means to be caught between cultures." The revelation rippled through the courtroom. Even Margaret looked surprised. "I've read every document in this case, reviewed every testimony, and I find the following: Victor White Eagle has not proven that Ayanna Morrison is an unfit mother. To the contrary, the evidence shows she's devoted to her children's welfare. She provides adequate food, shelter, education, and emotional support. Her marriage to Caleb Morrison appears genuine, based on mutual respect and shared commitment to the children's well-being." Victor started to speak. Judge Hayes silenced him with a look. Furthermore, Naomi White Eagle's testimony, while not sufficient for criminal charges without further investigation, raises serious concerns about Victor White Eagle's character and motivations. Combined with evidence of domestic violence and the financial incentives involved, this court cannot in good conscience place 4 vulnerable children in his care. She looked at Casa, still sitting with his family. And most importantly, the children themselves have expressed clear preferences. While not legally dispositive, their voices matter. They feel safe with the Morrisons. They call Caleb Morrison Papa. They're thriving in that environment. Judge Hayes picked up her gavel. "This court finds in favor of the defendants. Full custody remains with Ayanna Morrison and her husband, Caleb Morrison. Victor White Eagle's petition is denied. Furthermore, I'm issuing a restraining order. Mr. White Eagle is to have no contact with these children or their mother for a period of no less than 5 years. Violation will result in immediate arrest." The gavel fell. The sound echoed like thunder. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Ayanna pulled her children close, tears streaming down her face. Casa wrapped his arms around Caleb's waist. Mika was crying. Tala was smiling. Nako was laughing because everyone else was. Margaret Steele allowed herself one small, satisfied smile. And Victor White Eagle sat in his seat, face purple with rage, as federal marshals escorted him from the courtroom before he could do something that would land him in jail. It was over. They'd won. Against the law, against prejudice, against a system designed to separate families like theirs, they'd won. Outside the courthouse, Durango's main street was bright with afternoon sun. Pete was crying openly, hugging everyone. Elena was laughing and crying at the same time. Dr. Cross shook Caleb's hand so hard it hurt. "You did it," he said. "You actually did it." "We did it," Caleb corrected, arm around Ayanna. "All of us." That evening, back at Morrison Ranch, they had the closest thing to a celebration any of them could manage. Pete cooked enough food to feed 20 people. Elena brought pie. Margaret Steele, who never drank, had 2 glasses of wine. Naomi White Eagle smiled for the first time in years, knowing her children were free from Victor's reach. The children played in the yard, running and shouting, burning off the tension of months of fear. Casa taught the younger ones how to lasso fence posts. Mika sang to her chickens. Tala miraculously laughed out loud, a sound like silver bells. As the sun set over the San Juan Mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose and purple, Ayanna Morrison stood on her porch watching her family. Not the family she'd been born into, not the family she'd planned, but the family she'd fought for and won. Caleb came to stand beside her, and for the first time since they'd married, she leaned into him. Not much, just enough to share warmth. Enough to acknowledge that maybe, possibly, she was starting to feel something beyond gratitude. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything. Thank you for letting me help, for trusting me, for giving me a reason to wake up in the morning." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching their children play, watching the sun set, watching the first stars appear in a sky that went on forever. "What happens now?" Ayanna asked. "Now we live. We raise these kids. We run this ranch. We show Durango that family isn't about blood, it's about choice." She smiled, reached down, took his hand. The first time she'd done so voluntarily, without legal necessity, without audience, just because she wanted to. "I think I can do that." "Me too." Epilogue. 25 years later, in the summer of 1968, Morrison Ranch celebrated its 100th anniversary. The ranch had grown to nearly 1,000 acres, one of the most successful cattle operations in southwest Colorado. But more importantly, it had become something of a legend. The place where a white rancher had married an Apache woman to save her children. The place where family was defined by love, not blood. The place where kids of all colors played together, where old prejudices went to die, where the next generation learned that what mattered wasn't where you came from, but who you chose to be. Casa White Eagle Morrison, 33 years old, now ran the ranch alongside his father. He'd gone to college, studied agriculture and business, come back to help build something bigger. He had a wife and 3 kids of his own, and he still called Caleb Papa. Mika was a teacher in Durango, the first Apache woman to teach in the public school system. She sang to her students the way she'd once sung to chickens, and they loved her for it. Tala had become a doctor, inspired by Dr. Cross, determined to serve communities that had no one else. She split her time between the reservation clinic and Durango Hospital, healing the wounds of a divided world. Nako, who'd been too young to remember Victor, had just finished law school. Following in Margaret Steele's footsteps, he planned to fight for families like his, for children caught between systems for love that didn't fit legal categories. And Ayanna and Caleb Morrison, now in their 50s and 60s respectively, sat on the porch of the house they'd built together, watching grandchildren play in the yard, watching the sun set over mountains that had seen it all. "Do you ever think about that day?" Caleb asked. "When I stopped on the road, Ayanna smiled, reached over, took his hand the way she'd done thousands of times over 25 years of marriage. Real marriage, not legal protection, not business arrangement, love. Every day," she said, "I think about the question you asked. What can you do? Not what happened to you. Not why are you here. Just what can you do? Like I was a person, not a problem. That's when I knew you were different." "Men, best question I ever asked. Best answer I ever gave." They sat together as the sky turned colors that had no names, as their grandchildren laughed and played, as the ranch they'd built together hummed with life and love and the sound of family. Morrison Ranch, where a woman with nothing left to lose met a man with everything to give. Where blood didn't matter, but choice did. Where love won against law, against prejudice, against a world that said they couldn't exist. Where a simple question changed everything. What can you do? Turns out together they could do anything. The end.